Welcome back, y'all. What's happening out there in WBB land? We are back with another video, and this is a 13-part series that will chronicle every team's 2025 offseason. Each video will detail every team's current roster, their salary cap and assets, as well as look at free agent targets, needs, and an overall trajectory for the upcoming 2025 WNBA season. Without further ado, let's get it popping. The Los Angeles Sparks have a new head coach, 2 future All-Stars, and the 2nd overall pick in the upcoming 2025 draft. While the future looks extremely bright in the City of Angels, the question I want to answer is, will LA contend for a playoff spot in 2025? In this video, I will take you through what I think a realistic offseason for the Sparks could look like, including draft targets, free agent needs, as well as a possible trade that could bring college teammates back together again. In the end, I will answer if I think this team will have enough for their first playoff berth in 5 years.
And everything we do is about pace and space. We're going to play with quick pace at 94 feet, but also quick pace in the half court. The players are going to move. The ball's going to move. It's going to be shared. A lot of threes. We're going to try to, it's a simple game. Score more than your opponent. That's the goal.
That was new head coach Lynn Roberts discussing what she envisions this team's identity to look like this year and beyond. Here we can see the current cap sheet of the 2025 Los Angeles Sparks, which has a payroll of $936,000 and an available salary of $570,000. The first move we're going to make for the sake of this video is fully suspending Julie Alamand's $85,000 contract. This is the same thing the LA Sparks did last season. She has given no indication that she has any interest in coming from overseas. If she does decide to come over this year, that would obviously be a big pickup for a Los Angeles team that could use backcourt support. But for right now, I'm going to err on the side of history and say Alamand is out for next season. That gives us an updated cap sheet of 7 rostered players, a current payroll of $850,000, and $655,000 to spend in free agency and the draft. While free agency begins a full 3 months before the 2025 draft, we're going to take a look at that hot debate of who the Los Angeles Sparks should and will draft with that 2nd overall selection. A quick note to keep in mind when following the Sparks offseason: who they pick up in free agency could be a very good indication of who they ultimately decide to take at number 2. But for now, let's take a look at that hot debate on who the Sparks should take at number 2 and why I think they have a clear decision. While Olivia Miles fits an LA need of a facilitating point guard, as well as seemingly overhauling her outside shooting, I still think that falls short of the prospect that Kiki Iriefin is. When you really dive into this draft class, you can make an argument for several point guards that could be average to above average WNBA players. Inversely, when you look at front court talent, Kiki Iriefin is by far the top prospect, short of French center Dominique Malunga, whose future is unknown. Not only that, with the 13th selection, there will be several point guards available that, in my opinion, have more similar floors to Olivia Miles than that of Kiki Iriefin. While I will gladly concede that Olivia Miles fits a Los Angeles need, and whose ceiling could potentially be a WNBA All-Star, I think that Kiki Iriefin is a no doubt 2nd selection because her floor, her absolute basement in this league is a 10-year starter. Beyond overall upside potential, which I greatly favor Kiki, you're not only drafting for a positional need this year, you're drafting for the next 10 seasons. With a front court of Rakia Jackson, Cameron Brink, and Kiki Iriefin, you're setting your team up for success for the next 10 years. Now, I realize there will be plenty of commenters telling me why Olivia Miles has to be the 2nd selection, and that's totally fair. For me, and the sake of this video, we're going with what I project to be a far greater prospect in Kiki Urieffin, even though it does not fit a positional need. So let's take a look at what her addition to this cap sheet looks like. With the addition of Kiki, that brings the Sparks total payroll to $930,000 with $577,000 left to spend. Now, let's take a look at the point guard prospects I project to still be available at the 13th selection and who I ultimately think Los Angeles will select. From left to right, we see Cheyenne Sellers, Haley Van Lith, and Georgia Amore. All 3 point guards I project to be available. All 3 point guards have their pros and cons. While Cheyenne Sellers is by far the most physically imposing at 6'2", as well as the most defensively dynamic point guard of these 3, I think her inability to cultivate any kind of outside shot will end up holding her back from not only being the 13th selection, but potentially a first-round selection. The next 2 guards have similar profiles, and while I will concede that Georgia Amore has a slightly more efficient three-point shot, I think ultimately Los Angeles goes with the 5'9" guard from TCU, Haley Van Lith, at the 13th overall selection. While I think 13th may be a bit of a reach for Van Lith, I don't think it's outrageous by any means, particularly given what LA is looking for. Someone that can get up and down the floor, someone that can distribute, someone that can play make, and actually she's already had experience playing with Cameron Brink. Not to mention, while I know people will be up in arms about this, it is a business. And by selecting Haley Van Lith at 13th, Los Angeles will not only sell a lot of tickets, they will get a lot of headlines the day after the WNBA draft. Now, do I think that's solely the reason you draft her? No, of course not. But I think when the prospects are of similar caliber, when their ceilings and floor are similar, I think those kind of factors definitely weigh in. Looking at the updated cap sheet, Haley Van Lith makes 9 rostered players for a tick under $1 million and still $500,000 left to spend on the remaining 3 roster spots. With that much money left to spend, this opens up a myriad of options for Los Angeles to explore. This includes going after big-name free agents, offering future draft equity for expiring or distressed contracts like Jewell Loyd, or a more modest approach, which I think will be the direction they choose to go, where you try and round out this roster by converting that 26 pick into an asset you can use next season. One such player I think fits this description would be Haley Jones from the Atlanta Dream, potentially reuniting her, Cam Brink, and Kiki Urieffin from their days at Stanford. Now, to say Jones's career to this point has been underwhelming, I think would be an understatement. But this is part of the reason you may be able to convert that 26th overall pick into this 1-year, $80,000 contract. Now, I'm under no illusions that Jones will be some kind of game changer in LA's backcourt, or that she'll be able to help space the floor. What I am suggesting is a change of scenery seems like it might be the best medicine, particularly when she has players that she's already very familiar with and a current head coach that coached against her at Utah for her entire career at Stanford. As far as Atlanta's incentives to unload Jones and her $80,000, this will give them more freedom to go after bigger free agent front court players, which they are in desperate need of headed into the 2025 season. Couple that with the fact that Atlanta has very little draft equity headed into the 2025 draft, and I think we might see if a change of scenery is in fact what Haley Jones so desperately needs. Now LA gives themselves $427,000 to fill out the remaining 2 roster spots, which I do not think will involve that 28th draft selection. I do, however, think this would put LA in a very advantageous position to both sign a max contract or multiple mid-level contracts that they will be able to outbid other teams with less cap space. Let's now take a look at what I project to be the 6 most likely guard targets LA looks at in upcoming free agency. Tier 1 players are obviously unrestricted free agents with other rosters. Tier 2 players are obviously players that played in Los Angeles' backcourt last season. I anticipate at least one Tier 2 player back in Los Angeles at the start of the 2025 season, and that player is Ari McDonald. That leaves the Sparks with more than enough cap space to sign literally any free agent or potentially even trade for a core designated player and the Supermax $249,000. Now, I don't anticipate them being in the market for a Kelsey Plum, for instance, but like I said before, with this much cap space remaining, being able to lure a Natisha Heidemann over, being able to lure a Sydney Colson over will be a far easier task when you can offer them much more money than their current rosters. I'd be remiss not to reiterate that this is an exercise of most likely scenarios for each team in the offseason. So while you might not think Natisha Heidemann, Sydney Colston, or Erica Wheeler are great free agent prospects, the reality is that is the talent pool Los Angeles will be going after. This is not an exercise where I simply pluck the biggest names in free agency and put them on every roster, but rather an exercise where I try to construct the most realistic and best roster given the needs and resources for this upcoming offseason. And now for the question I posed at the top of the video. Can this 2025 LA Sparks roster make a playoff run? And while I think they will be improved, while I think they will be competitive, short of signing a Jewel Lloyd or Kelsey Plum, I feel like this team is still at least 1 year away. That said, if you're giving me 3 or 4 teams that I have to buy stock in now for the next 10 seasons, Los Angeles would definitely be on the short list. But as always, I pose the question to you. Who do you think the Sparks should go after? Who should their number one priority be? And most importantly, if you're the general manager, who are you drafting with that number 2 overall pick? Let me know in the comments. As always, like, share, and hey, hit the subscribe button. It's free.